Hello, this is the Harboring Light. I'm Mary. I give a conservative take about the world around me. All right, so feedback is important. You have questions, comments, concerns, show ideas. Reach out to me. Either all of those links will be provided for you. All right, so here's a list of some of the audio platforms that I'm on. I'm on Spreaker. I'm on Spotify. I'm on iHeartRadio. I'm on Pandora, Amazon Music, just to name a few. So this episode is about books. As I said, I'm going to continue this out, but more so about the aspects of music. And so I'm going to give my personal thoughts about that, along with the allegedly when the first book about music was produced. And there you go. All right. Let's listen up. Okay, so here is some AI-generated responses about what I was saying with the first book on music written. And after this, I'm going to go into depth about my thoughts about music and books. And there's a lot of categories with it, but I'm going to go into a lot of depth about that after this. So it says the first book that was written about music is not definitely known, as the origin of written literature and music are deeply intertwined and vary across different cultures. However, one of the earliest surviving written composition that significantly impacts music literature is leaking to the Epic of Gilgamesh, which, while not a book about music, it often is cited as the first great literary work for a more specific focus on music history. Now, Into the Groove, the story of the sound from the foil to the vinyl by Jonathan Scott explores the early history of record sound, starting from the first known record in the 1800s and continuing to the significant vinyl records of the 1940s. So it also goes on to say, if you are looking for a book that focuses specifically on the history of music, the history of music from the Encyclopedia Britannica provides a detailed overview of music's development through history. Though it's not a standalone book, but rather an extensive article. And yes, it makes a lot of sense that, I'm just going to touch on this a little bit and then go into even more depth. So it makes a lot of sense that the Epic of Gilgamesh is, referenced as a musical aspect. When you get into a lot of times when you get into the philosophy or religious aspects of literature, those are things, music and the story goes hand in hand, because they emphasize the point. Music within that emphasize the point of what they're experiencing. And it just makes a whole lot of sense to me. All right. That's the end of this segment. I'm going on to my thoughts. Here we go. All right, everyone. Here is my perspective about books or literature, that's involving music. So I think it involves a lot of tiers here. You have fiction, nonfiction, you have educational, and you have autobiographical. Now, I'm going to touch on all subjects. Now, when fictional, of course, that's made up there. And when you get in the depths and the souls of talking about things that are, I equate that to put it like cinema with words here. That's the perspective that it pertains to me. So, these are characters. These aren't real people. These aren't, even the ones that say they're based on real life, real people, it's still hyperbolic. And so those really engage the reader to gain a different perspective about the aspects of music and how that contributes to our culture. And so, depending on what the subject matter is, most of the times when things about music is written, when we get into the aspects of nonfiction, it's always those undertones of dealing with some sort of adversity that has to do with indulgence and the price of fame and so forth. And so that begs the question in itself, too, about the aspects of what is it saying with music in our culture and in literature. What are they saying about the contributions that it does to the person who produces music? That's one aspect. Another aspect from an educational point of view, some people are naturally gifted. They can just hear music by ear, and they don't necessarily need to study it. Excuse me just a minute. All right. I'm in my van right now, so recording. And let me know about the audio perspective, about is it clear or so forth. I'm testing something out to see how that works. All right, so as I said, some people can just hear music by ear. They can understand it and mimic it. Some people, they have their precision. They have the aptitude to understand the scales, read music, and study it. And then when you get the aspects of culture, well, the aspects of studying the history of music, that takes another turn too in itself. And I'm going to read brief facts about what I found on that. So it gives you a glimpse of, too, when you go back and visit and read, when you read the aspects of the historical parts of music and history, it in itself gives a lot, even more in-depth social commentary of the times in which the music was produced. So, for instance, Vienna, and that time when classical music was produced, that was the way to be. That was where to go. If anybody who was anybody, they went to Vienna to get the exposure that they need to become a successful composer. And so that changed the shape and the culture of what was thought of about music of that time. Music at that time was for the monarchy, and then, and necessarily for the intellectual elite and so forth. And so, when you get in the aspects of secular and non-secular music, then you get into a whole other atmosphere about the commentary of, what sort of subject matter are you producing and saying to your audience when you get into, because most of the time, common era music during that time and before, that didn't center around, of course, the common people had, their own, that was outside of secular music, had their own music that made, again, social commentary, sort of like, little ditties, folk music about what they were experiencing. And then when you start into the aspects about religious undertone, religious music, that gets into a whole nother arena about the commentaries of music of a time, of making sure that it touches the subject matter of people who can understand it and doesn't put them off, who are spiritual. And it's also another things that producing music that is considered secular music, but it's so popular that the whole they mainstream, it becomes mainstream. For instance, there's a lot of, I'm trying to think about the specific name of it, but Hallelujah and stuff like that. And then the invention of the Vienna Boys Choir and so forth. This is, again, the season of Christmas and so forth. But the way that it's presented, it's an appeal that is of the masses. And that says a lot to the contribution of the way, looking back, and of the way that if you do something right or you do something different, you can attract people to listen to your music who you nevertheless never thought would be interested in it. And it's something to say about the impact that music has in our society. Because again, if it's done right or done differently, you never know the attention that it can bring. And that also calls the musician, the producers, and so forth. That gives them an outlet to touch, to have people focus on the true matter of the subject of music, that it transcends, culture and so forth. All right, so when we get, my final point here is autobiographical. That has to do with music. So when we specifically focus in on certain artists and their lives and the impact of what they were before they became musicians and the impact of them being very successful in the aftermath, again, a lot of those take the turn about that aspects of you, if you want to see it from that point of view, to the allegory tones of substance and sin. And a lot of times it's not like that, sometimes it's not like that, but most of the time it is. And it seems to me, when you're reading the books of these musicians and so forth, it's even more focused than, excuse me just a minute. Okay, sorry about that. It's even more focused, I would say, than, watching the autobiographic, watching their biography on television. So this is why I say this. So when you read something, you tend to just innately focus in on the written word, and you the tendency is to be in a quiet place to where you just primarily focus in on the subject matter that you're reading. And I think when, for instance, when you see shows like Behind the Music, and there's so many of them, they have the music in the background, they have commercials interrupting, and they have a lot of stuff vying for your attention to where you get the main points of what they're talking about, but you're not really in itself. For the most part, if, you have issues with, long, steady, focused, long, form content, you tend to trail off and not really pay attention. And so when you read a book about the artist, it in itself is the opportunity to really engage with what they have experienced and what they are saying about the contribution that they put in and how they think of music. And so you also take it with a grain of salt because, a lot of times it's unfortunate that, these books aren't necessarily the truth or what was actually experienced, in these musicians' lives. And so a lot of times they're very sensationalized too. And so I remember growing up, and I remember Diana Ross, she came out with a book, my biography of her life. And so it was, a hot button issue at the time because you talked about, it was very, sensationalized. It was about her personal life, her, affairs that she had with the, sordid man and so forth. And so, it's very strange, to get into depths about that, that intimate details about that. But at the same time, it's what I guess is that whole notion that sensationalism sells, so why not? And then also, it's one of those things where, now, this is just from my memory and then what I'm, recalling, that, trying to intact her image, have a new image than what was, was assorted and what was really a situation that Diana Ross was not a very nice person. And then what I mean by that is she would not understand that when she was in the group and the Supremes, it wasn't all about her. It was about a unity and it was big. And then being in a group like that, it's unfortunate that some musicians, particularly, the ones that are ego-stricken, it's unfortunate with that. They don't understand that, when you have the opportunity to have that sort of success, you have to be very demure about it and be very humble. But unfortunately, she was not. And I don't know, I think that book was one of those things to try to distract people from thinking about that and seeing her in a new light, or it was just weird. And so, that in itself is one of those things that buys in itself too about the aspects of culture and how that contributes to the mainstream psyche or the psyche of what people contribute or think about when they associate pop stars and they associate their sordid lives and all of that. And as I said, it was one of those things too that people don't realize a lot, that musicians in itself, particularly when they become famous, really famous, and then when they are solo acts and so forth, they're in itself, they're not really that person. They're just a persona of whatever they're supposed to represent for that particular genre of music, or so forth. I think pop stars, particularly female pop stars, are a really good example of that. Anywhere from Cher to Madonna to Celine Dion. She's more subtle. She's not as wow, but she had her moments, and the list goes on. Ariana Grande, list goes on. So when you look at it, focus in, focus out. Would you really buy that they really live their lives like that? They say that, when they go into their lives day to day, would you really buy they would behave like that? Or is it hyperbolic of what they naturally are? And then is it a character? And it's quite interesting when you see a lot of actors that transition to become musicians and they're, very successful with it. That acting ability also helps sales their image too. And that's something to really, look in between the lines about too. So, with all this said, I'm going to wrap up and I'm going to talk about what I found as far as some facts about the aspects of history and music. All right, here we go. And of course, this source will be provided for you in this episode. So it's entitled, this is from the Library of Congress. It says books about music before 1800. So it goes into depth. This is a synopsis about the selection. So here we go. So shortly after the music division was established 120 years ago, a handful of acquisition priorities were agreed upon. Early writings about music published before 1801 were identified as having both historical significance and a high research value, and consequently, it gained top priority status in art collection development. Because the persistent and successful efforts of preceders, well over 50% of all books written about music that are listed are the RISMB volumes are now held at the Library of Congress. These treasures range from, forgive me for pronunciation, Johannes Tickler's. For instance, is one of the earliest examples of a glossary of musical terms, to the Theoreticum Opus Musique. This was the discipline and of the discipline in 1480. This was the first printed book principally devoted to the study of music. So in the early 70s, the International Musicology Society and the International Association of Music Libraries compiled a comprehensive inventory of all known writings about music that had been published between 1474 through 1800, the resulting 2-volume categories. So this is part of the Repertoire International Sources of Musicale series and comprised of more than 3,800 entries of literature related to the theoretical, historical, aesthetic, and technical aspects of music. So this online presentation includes digital scans of well over 200 pre-1801 publications about music that are reported in the RISMB series with the Library of Congress. Much of the groundwork of this project was laid back in the early 80s when music division staff fully Understanding the scope and scholarly demands of this outstanding collection, made the decision to create preservation microfilms for the collection as a checklist. So the digital scans presented were in turn generated for those preservation of microfilms. And so I'm ending this with this whole point of why did I just read that? So in itself, this is a good example of how preservation and how, exploring music outside of contemporary music, where music even before then, where it originates, where it comes from, and how it shapes time and how it shapes culture, and how impactful in itself and the importance that it gets to the level of scholarly preservation. Congress, the Library of Congress, understanding the importance of music and its values to our society, that's really a lot to say about the impact of music and how that really changes and shapes a culture, and that's something to focus in on and pay attention to. All right, so this reaches the end of the Hartman Light. Please give me comments about what you think about this episode. And then, let me know what you think about the aspects of music and culture and literature and all of that. All right. Tune in, turn up, and absolutely take care out there. Bye-bye for now.